The perpetual hum of Santa Monica, a blend of ocean breeze, distant traffic, and the murmur of countless conversations, was the soundtrack to my life. I was Evelyn, 28 years old, and my world revolved around the rhythmic thrum of my Yamaha RD 350LC. She wasn't just a motorcycle, she was an extension of me, a vibrant, two-wheeled rebellion against the everyday. Built for speed and a little bit of drama, the RD 350LC was a two-stroke beast, notorious for its smoky entrance, especially at startup or when it hit its power band. If you knew bikes, you knew the signature cloud it left in its wake, a pungent, oily haze that lingered like a declaration. My days were spent working at the Salty Siren, a small, independent coffee shop perched just a stone's throw from the Santa Monica Pier. The shop was a haven of artisanal brews and ocean views, but outside, the pier itself was a maelstrom of tourists and locals, all vying for space. Parking, especially during the relentless Southern California summer, was a gladiatorial sport. Thankfully, the pier had a designated motorcycle parking area, a small, coveted patch of asphalt that offered a sliver of peace in the chaotic concrete jungle. That's where I always left my Yamaha, tucked safely among fellow two-wheeled machines, a silent sentinel awaiting my return. The first hint of trouble, the first wisp of the smoke that would eventually define my summer, came on a Tuesday. The afternoon sun was baking the boardwalk, and the scent of sunscreen and stale popcorn hung heavy in the air. I just finished my shift, the aroma of roasted coffee still clinging to my apron, and was walking back to the pier, my mind already drifting to the open road. As I approached the motorcycle parking, a knot tightened in my stomach. A gleaming silver sedan, a luxury model that screamed rental car, was inching its way into the motorcycle section. My stomach dropped as I realized it was aiming directly for the spot my Yamaha occupied. The driver, a man in a crisp polo shirt, was leaning out, gesturing impatiently at the space, while his passenger, a woman with oversized sunglasses, was already fumbling with a beach bag. They were trying to move my bike. My blood ran cold. The front wheel wasn't turning, thanks to the bright orange disc lock I always secured before leaving. They were heaving at the handlebars, grunting with effort, trying to dislodge my pride and joy as if it were an inconveniently placed shopping cart. "What the heck do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice cutting through the seaside din, laced with an anger that surprised even myself. "That's my bike," the man paused, his face blank, then turned to me with an expression of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Oh," he said, as if noticing me for the first time, "we just need to park. This entire lot is full. You can leave your bike anywhere." His tone was dismissive, as if my bike, my valuable, cherished possession, was an insignificant hurdle to his immediate convenience. The woman just stared, her sunglasses reflecting the bright sky, a silent accomplice to his brazen disregard. A surge of pure, primal fury coursed through me. My hands clenched at my sides. They needed to park, and my motorcycle was merely an obstacle. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to unleash a torrent of colorful language. "Okay," I said, my voice deceptively calm. "Fine, I'll move my bike." Their faces relaxed, a smug sense of victory creeping onto their features. The man even offered a small, patronizing nod. As I approached my Yamaha, my mind was racing, a single, wickedly delicious thought forming. My eyes flickered to the silver sedan. The driver's door was still open, a welcoming maw of air-conditioned comfort. I envisioned my Yamaha, her twin exhausts, and a particular, glorious cloud. I unlocked the disc lock with a deliberate click that echoed in the sudden silence. I swung my leg over the seat, straddling the machine that was about to become an instrument of my righteous indignation. Their attention was fixed on me, likely expecting me to meekly roll my bike away to some obscure, less convenient location. Instead, I backed the Yamaha up slowly, precisely, until its twin chrome exhausts were pointed directly into the open cabin of their pristine, air-conditioned car. The cool exhaust pipes gleamed malevolently in the sun. I folded out the Kickstarter. This wasn't a push-button start for this vintage beauty. It required a physical, decisive kick. As my foot pressed down, I twisted the throttle, holding it wide open. This was the key. With flat-slide carburetors rather than the more modern constant velocity ones, holding the throttle open like that before firing up meant the engine would gorge itself on an excessive mixture of fuel and two-stroke oil. The result? An instant, glorious, suffocating cloud. My foot came down hard on the Kickstarter. The engine coughed, then roared to life with a satisfying, crackling burst. And then it happened. A monstrous, opaque cloud of thick, blue-white two-stroke smoke belched from the exhausts, billowing directly into their open car, filling the interior in an instant. The air was suddenly thick with the unmistakable scent of burning oil and gasoline, a pungent, choking declaration of my displeasure. The driver shrieked, scrambling to pull his door shut, but it was too late. The woman gasped, coughing, wildly flapping her hands in a desperate attempt to dispel the noxious cloud now engulfing their luxury vehicle. Their faces, moments ago so smug, were now contorted in a mixture of shock, disgust, and absolute, unadulterated panic. They were choking, gagging on the very air they breathed. I watched, a small, grim smile playing on my lips, as they frantically rolled up the windows, trapping themselves in their own personal, smoky hell. I let the engine idle for another moment, letting the last tendrils of the blue cloud dissipate into the general atmosphere before slowly, deliberately pulling away. I found another spot, a little further down, and parked. As I walked back past their car, I could still see them inside, wiping their eyes, fanning the air, their faces green with lingering nausea. Their entitled expressions had been thoroughly wiped clean. Thinking back, I knew all I probably did was make them think that all bikers were jerks, but in that moment, it made me feel better. It felt like a small, righteous victory. But that was just the beginning. That incident, while satisfying, didn't solve the core problem. If anything, it merely served as a prelude. The summer crowds swelled, and with them, the audacity of drivers who saw designated parking as mere suggestions. The silver sedan family, as I mentally dubbed them, wasn't an isolated incident. They were a symptom of a much larger, recurring problem. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself constantly on edge. My work at the Salty Siren became less about the joy of craft coffee and more about the anxiety of leaving my bike vulnerable. I tried reasoning with people. "Excuse me," I'd say, as someone tried to squeeze a minivan into a motorcycle spot, "this area is for motorcycles only." The responses ranged from blank stares to outright hostility. "There's nowhere else to park," was a common refrain, delivered with an air of victimhood, as if my motorcycle was the problem. I even put up a small, laminated sign near my spot, clearly stating, "Motorcycle parking only. Violators will be towed." It lasted less than an hour before someone had ripped it down, leaving only a few sticky bits of tape. The stakes began to rise. One afternoon, I returned to find a long, angry scratch marring the gleaming chrome of my exhaust pipe. It wasn't deep enough to compromise the integrity, but it was a clear act of malice, a deliberate affront. Another time, my rear tire valve cap was missing, replaced with a small, crumpled piece of paper that read, "Get a car, loser." My blood boiled. This wasn't just about parking anymore, it was personal. My beloved Yamaha, my escape, my freedom, was being targeted. I reported it to the Piers Parking Enforcement, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, who just sighed and shook his head. "Evelyn, I wish I could help, but we're stretched thin. These tourists come in, they think they own the place. Unless they're actively damaging it when we're here, there's not much we can do." He offered to put a discreet camera near the spot, but that would take weeks to arrange. I felt completely powerless, a lone warrior against an army of inconsiderate drivers. My lowest point came one sweltering Saturday. The coffee shop was bustling, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time a car horn blared outside, I flinched, imagining some new indignity inflicted upon my Yamaha. I contemplated selling the bike, trading her for something less conspicuous, something that wouldn't draw attention. The thought made my chest ache. The Yamaha was more than transport, it was my identity. To give her up felt like admitting defeat, like letting these anonymous aggressors win. I slumped against the counter, staring out at the relentless sun, feeling utterly drained and defeated. The joy of riding, the freedom I cherished, was being overshadowed by constant worry and indignation. But then, as I wiped down the counter, a spark ignited. The memory of the silver sedan family's choked faces, their frantic scrambling to escape the two-stroke cloud, resurfaced. It had been effective, if temporary. What if I could make it more than temporary? What if I could make it a lesson? A thought, wickedly inventive and fueled by my mounting frustration, began to crystallize. It wouldn't be about just one car. It would be about making a statement. I began to plan. The key, I realized, was not just the smoke, but the impact. The initial incident had been good, but it was a quick hit. I needed something more drawn out, more public, something that would resonate beyond a few coughs. The flat-slide carburetors, those temperamental beauties, were my secret weapon. They were notorious for their tendency to load up with fuel and oil if the engine wasn't revved consistently, especially at low speeds or idle. This loading up, would create a larger, denser cloud when the throttle was finally opened. My plan involved timing, opportunity, and a little bit of calculated mischief. I started observing the patterns of the most egregious offenders, the ones who consistently tried to commandeer the motorcycle spots. There was a particular tourist van, a gaudy monstrosity with a perpetually overflowing roof rack that seemed to embody the worst of the parking entitlement. Its driver, a perpetually scowling man who always had a cell phone glued to his ear, seemed to consider the entire pier his personal parking lot. He was my new target. I waited. I watched. The climax would need to be perfect. It needed an audience. And it needed to be undeniably, unforgettably pungent. One particularly busy Saturday, the kind where the pier was shoulder to shoulder with humanity, the tourist van appeared. It was attempting, with truly remarkable arrogance, to back into my motorcycle spot, pushing aside a smaller scooter that already occupied an adjacent space. The driver was yelling into his phone, completely oblivious to the chaos he was causing. This was it, the perfect storm of entitlement and opportunity. I walked towards my Yamaha, a calm resolution settling over me. The key was in my hand. The van was still struggling, the driver grunting with effort, trying to force his behemoth into a space it simply wasn't designed for. A small crowd had gathered, watching the spectacle with a mix of amusement and annoyance. This was my stage. I swung my leg over the seat, the worn leather comforting beneath me. I pulled out the Kickstarter. I pressed the kill switch, ensuring the engine wouldn't immediately fire, and then I slowly, deliberately, kicked the engine over about a dozen times, each kick sending fresh fuel and oil into the exhausts without ignition. This was the loading up phase. The anticipation was electric. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on me, curious. The van driver finally managed to jostle the scooter out of the way and was now attempting to back his vehicle squarely into my designated spot. His rear bumper was almost touching my front wheel. With a final deep breath, I turned the kill switch off. I twisted the throttle, holding it wide open just like before. This was it. One powerful, decisive kick. My foot connected. The engine roared, a magnificent, ear-splitting explosion of sound that made the seagulls squawk and the crowd jump. And then it happened. A colossal, opaque cloud of blue-white smoke erupted from my twin exhausts. It wasn't just a puff, it was a volcanic eruption. The sheer volume of preloaded fuel and oil created a truly monumental smokescreen that billowed outwards, engulfing not just the rear of the tourist van, but also the driver, who was still leaning out of his window, shouting into his phone. The smoke swirled, thick and acrid, enveloping the van, the driver, and even spilling over into the small crowd. Coughing immediately broke out. The driver, caught mid-sentence, choked, his face contorting in horror as the fumes filled his lungs. He stumbled back, gagging, frantically trying to bat away the oily cloud that clung to his clothes, his hair. People in the crowd started coughing and laughing, some recoiling, others pointing. The sheer, overwhelming nature of the smoke was undeniable. It smelled of vengeance, mingled with two-stroke oil. I held the throttle open for a full 30 seconds, letting the engine scream, letting the smoke continue to pour out until the area around the van was completely obscured, a blue-white fog bank in the middle of Santa Monica. The driver was now scrambling to get back into his van, fumbling with the door, his face bright red, eyes watering. He had learned his lesson, if not in politeness, then certainly in the consequences of vehicular arrogance. Finally, I eased off the throttle, letting the engine settle into a rough idle, the smoke tapering off into a mere wisp. The crowd, now cleared of the worst of the fumes, was buzzing. The van driver, his face still pale and tear-streaked, slammed his door shut and, without another glance at the motorcycle spots, slammed the gear shift into drive and sped away, leaving a faint, oily scent in his wake. The resolution was immediate and deeply satisfying. From that day on, my specific motorcycle parking spot was never again challenged. The reputation of the Smoky Yamaha spread among the regulars, and even the most aggressive tourists seemed to give my bike a wide berth. I had established a new, pungent, and highly effective deterrent. My peace of mind returned, and I could enjoy my work and my rides without the constant, gnawing anxiety. But as with all things, there was a twist, a small sting of karma. Just a few days later, while riding down Pacific Coast Highway, the unmistakable sound of a connecting rod snapping ripped through the roar of my engine. A cloud of white smoke, this time not a controlled emission but a sign of catastrophic failure, belched from my exhausts, followed by the sickening clatter of metal. My beloved Yamaha RD 350LC, my Smoky Avenger, had given its last breath. She had literally blown up. The engine was seized, a victim of her vintage nature, the constant high-revving antics, and perhaps the extreme punishment I had put her through in my quest for revenge. It was a bittersweet moment. My nemesis had been vanquished, the parking problem solved, but at the cost of my cherished ride. I stood there on the shoulder of the highway, watching the last wisps of smoke curl from her now silent exhausts, a strange mix of sadness and triumph swirling within me. Karma, it seemed, had a sense of humor. I had gotten my revenge, but the bike, in its own dramatic way, had gotten its due too. It was a fair trade, I decided, for the sweet, smoky taste of victory.